concentration of the Russian forces. So what does it mean? Are we heading to a new war, or is it a blackmail? Is it something else? We are happy to have three best experts in the field. Mr. Taras Kutsiu, Dr. Taras Kutsiu will start, followed by Dr. Hanna Shelest, and then we'll have Ambassador Kurt Walker, who will deliver the Western perspective and how does Washington view this, and what should the West do to prevent catastrophe. So without further ado, the floor is open, and I invite Taras to give us a 10-15-minute presentation of how he sees the situation.
Okay, I'm going to focus on the what I believe is causing this current military buildup, and I would put it into the context that President Putin has been obsessed with Ukraine since the first day of his presidency 21 years ago. The reason for this is Ukraine's place in Russian national identity, and also during the last 20 years, the evolution of Russian nationalism in Putin's regime to, I would say, a regression towards a more a Russian nationalism which is more evident from the Tsarist and white emigre perspective. So this is a stagnation even on the nationalism, the Russian nationalism that existed in the Soviet Union. Why do I say this? Because the Soviet Union did not deny the existence of Ukrainian Ukrainians. The current Russian authorities deny the very existence of Ukrainian Ukrainians. This is only happened in the pre-Soviet period. So actually the Russian nationalism we have today in Putin's Russia is far worse. And hence the language, such as words such as Ukraine will be destroyed. Ukraine does not exist. Ukraine is artificial. The frustration that is evident is because Ukraine has been lost to Russia. Putin cannot accept this. At the same time, Putin's actions are making Ukraine even more lost to Russia. You know, in the future, maybe there will be a time when Putin's monument will go up in Kiev as the father of Ukrainian nation. He's doing wonders for Ukrainian national identity, particularly in eastern Ukraine. So Ukrainians and Ukraine, in the eyes of the Kremlin, should be acting like Belarus and like President Lukashenko. That's how Moscow believes Ukraine should act. When it does not, it gets very frustrated with Ukraine, because the Russian nationalism that exists today in Russia believes in this old concept of Общий русский народ, in English, pan-Russian nation. And the pan-Russian nation is composed of Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians. There are three parts of one Ruski or Russian people, Russian nation. And this pan-Russian nation in the Russian world, Ruski Mir, is the core of Putin's Eurasian Union, which is meant to compete with the European Union and be this alternative center of civilization and power. Without Ukraine, that's pretty impossible for many reasons, because Ukraine is the oldest part of this Russian world. Kiev is 600 years older than Moscow. You can't really have this Putin's concept of a Russian world without Ukraine, hence the obsession with Ukraine. Now, if Ukraine was never going to be like Belarus, if no Ukrainian president was ever going to be like Lukashenko prior to 2014, that's even more the case today. And therefore, hence you have this highly obsessed and frustrated Russian president, because in his eyes, President Poroshenko or President Zelensky should be acting like Lukashenko, and they are not. But they won't, ever. And as I keep saying, the more Russia acts, the more it annexes territory, the more it acts aggressively, the more it hurls insults on a daily basis in Russian disinformation. There is more, people joke, there is more on Russian TV about Ukraine than there is about Russia. The Russian TV, Russian social media is obsessed with Ukraine, literally obsessed, which has made Ukraine into the second enemy of the Russian people in Russian eyes, in Russian opinion polls, after the US. This is just not bringing Ukraine closer to Russia, it's actually pushing Ukraine away. And you see this in opinion polls. NATO membership was not popular in Ukraine prior to 2014. Today, if there was a referendum, 65% or so of Ukrainians would vote in favor of NATO membership. You can see this also in President Zelensky. If there was a Ukrainian leader with whom Russia could have potentially had a compromise deal, peace deal, it was President Zelensky. He's not a nationalist. He's a centrist. He's a Jewish Russian speaker from Eastern Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin cannot do a peace deal with Volodymyr Zelensky, then a peace deal is simply impossible with any Ukrainian leader unless they literally act like Lukashenko and put both hands in the air and surrender. And that's simply not going to happen. I think that the reason why this frustration has now reached boiling point in Moscow is because by the spring of this year, both sides, in particular Zelensky, had come to the conclusion that no negotiated peace deal is possible now on the Donbass. Russian or Putin and his group of Siloviki, security force leaders of Russia, simply don't understand the concept of compromise. As I say, they could have had a compromise deal with Zelensky in 2019, 2020, but they just pursued a continuously hard line towards Ukraine, which even somebody moderate like Zelensky was unable to accept. Why do I think that the conclusion is reached that a negotiated peace deal is now really very difficult, if not impossible? Two reasons. Zelensky would not have sanctioned 3 pro-Russian television channels owned by Vladimir Putin's representative in Ukraine, Viktor Medvedchuk, if there was still a chance of a peace deal. He would not have done this. Because in going after Medvedchuk's TV channels, he's in effect going after Putin's man in Ukraine. The other reason why I think this is because Zelensky has launched a Crimean Platform initiative, which will be unveiled the day before Ukraine's Independence Day in August. And as we know, for Russia, it has always argued that the Crimea is non-negotiable, that we can only discuss peace agreement on Donbass. Crimea is off the table. Well, it's not Poroshenko, it's Zelensky who's put the Crimea back on the table. And this is getting a lot of support around the world, including from countries like Turkey. And of course, this is like waving a red flag to a bull to Putin. What is Putin seeking to do? I don't believe that he's seeking to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. What he's trying to do is repeat what happened in Georgia in 2008. I provoked Zelensky by using the Russian proxies in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, attacking Ukraine. Ukraine leader Zelensky then orders a counterattack, like in South Ossetia in 2008. And then this gives the excuse for Russia to invade, to defend its citizens, because Russia has been distributing passports to the occupied territories of the Donbass as it had done in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. So that's the aim, the provocation, the attempt to provocation. Now, the problem with this provocation, I plan, is that Zelensky is not Saakashvili. He's quite a moderate centrist leader. He's not a, if he came to power saying, I'm different to Poroshenko. But I don't think even Poroshenko would have reacted in such a way. Why is a full invasion not possible? Well, because Ukraine is simply too big for Russia to invade and annex. This is not Georgia, the size of Georgia or Moldova. South Ossetia is relatively close. The southern borders of South Ossetia are relatively close to Tbilisi. Donetsk is nearly 800 kilometers from Kiev. So I think Ukraine's too big. It would take half of the Russian army. Invading and occupying are two separate things. And what do you do when you occupy? There are no pro-Russian leaders in Ukraine which are popular that could be installed and could replace Zelensky. There's simply none. And if anything like that was attempted, there would be a violent Euromaidan again. Ukraine today also, compared to 7 years ago in 2014, has a very good armed army, has a National Guard, has territorial formations which would act like partisans in the event of an occupation. So I think that the idea that somehow Russia is contemplating that, I'm sure it's there, but I think it's just simply unrealistic. What I think that if Russia were to come in, it would be an attempt to expand the region of the Donetsk and Luhansk so-called People's Republics to the whole of the Donbass. That would be, I think, the extent of their plan, with also similar to Georgia, then maybe Russia recognizing the independence of these two regions. There are rumors in Kiev that Putin may do that on Wednesday in his State of the Nation address. But whether that's feasible or not is another matter. So in conclusion, I think that both sides have exhausted potential peace negotiation options, primarily because Russia is simply unable to understand the concept of compromise. And this flows from Russia's lack of recognition of any of the former Soviet republics having real sovereignty. In Russian eyes, the only country in the former Soviet Union with real sovereignty is Russia. None of the other republics have real sovereignty. They're not really proper countries, and Ukraine and Belarus even more so because they're just parts of Russia. Linked to that is what I've mentioned, that Russia does not accept the very existence of Ukraine. Ukraine as an artificial country is something that's said every day on Russian TV. Putin and Russian leaders continually talk about Russians and Ukrainians as one people. But more importantly, one of the most consistently stable figures of the Levada Center in Moscow, the only independent polling agency in Russia since 2014, has been 85% support in Russia for the annexation of Crimea. This has been stable for 7 years. It hasn't really changed, maybe 1 or 2%. Alexei Navalny supports the annexation of Crimea. We shouldn't make a big romantic opinion about him in the West. He is a Russian nationalist, maybe a moderate nationalist, but he's nevertheless a nationalist. And he's certainly not a liberal in the sense of Boris Nemtsov, who was a true liberal, and who Boris Nemtsov in 2014 condemned the annexation of Crimea. Navalny has never done that. If 85% of Russians support the annexation of Crimea, and about the same number, 70–80% of Ukrainians reject the annexation of Crimea, how do you find common ground? Also stable is about 50% of Russians support the kind of separation of the Donbass from Ukraine. This is less than Crimea, because Crimea has more importance in Russian mythology, but nevertheless 50% is 50%. My final point is that despite all of this military buildup, heavy aggression, information warfare, disinformation, Ukraine is forever lost to the Russian world. You cannot rewind the tape recorder back to pre-2014. It's gone. And the more Russia does what it's doing, the more it will push Ukraine away. Zelensky is repeating the history of Leonid Kuchma. In 1994, Leonid Kuchma was elected on also a kind of a moderate pro-Russian platform. He said he will negotiate better than Leonid Kravchuk with Russia. He failed. He failed with Boris Yeltsin. Zelensky's failed with Putin. The problem is far deeper. The problem is that Russia is unwilling to accept the existence of Ukraine. And what Russia is doing in its military aggression is actually increasing Ukrainian national identity in eastern Ukraine amongst Russian speakers, who are the greatest number of people fighting in the Donbass. The highest rate of casualties of Ukrainian soldiers are Dnipropetrovsk, not Western Ukraine, Dnipropetrovsk. So ironically, Putin claims that they are defending Russian speakers in Ukraine. That's not true. They are killing Russian speakers, they're fighting Russian speakers, and they are leading to the creation of 2 million IDPs of Russian speakers. So that's all a complete myth. So I think that sadly, this kind of obsession, anger, frustration on the part of Russia is there. It's going to continue for the next 15 years because Putin is president for life. He's president until 2036. This will not change. We will continue to have this for the next at least 15 years, if not more. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, please.
Thank you. I hope we can be a little bit more optimistic than 2036. That is definitely a question, unfortunately, not only of Mr. Putin, but of that public opinion that we already have in Russia about everything happening in Ukraine. But I probably would like to start with the idea that we should not narrow current Russian actions only to Ukraine. And it seems to me that the current build-up and this raising of stocks, it's multidimensional and multitask, meaning that definitely the big amount is aimed for Ukraine or against Ukraine, it is better to say. But it is also against NATO and the United States this time, and against the Black Sea. And I will try to explain why I think that Putin is trying by this build up to cover more tasks and to gain much more than just to persuade Ukraine for the certain, it's not a compromise for sure, because he would like surrender. So when somebody is asking from the mediators why Ukraine cannot go for the compromise, I usually ask the question, are you sure it is compromise but not surrendering? Because in your proposals, and recently Ukrainian Prism published a big report, one chapter of which was analyzing things like 15 peace plans that been presented during these 7 years. And what we note is that all of the mediators, doesn't matter they're pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, or as much neutral as possible, they prefer to ask some compromise from Ukraine, even naming it, and nothing from Russia. So they expect that if Ukraine do something, Russians are leaving, and that's all. What is definitely is very naive and not possible. So if with Ukraine, it is more or less understandable for us, and Taras perfectly described that it is definitely aimed against Zelensky and his new vision of the policy. It's not a strategy yet. It is quite a situational and tactic. But let's say there is a certain vision of the new Zelensky. It's not anymore, let me look into the eyes of Putin and decide everything. It is much stronger Ukrainian president. But what are other, let's say, options and tasks that Russia is trying to cover with this build-up? First of all, it is definitely testing the new NATO unity, because we understand perfectly that the previous 4 years of quite an antagonistic position of the American president against NATO was what a lot of people in Moscow enjoyed following. So now when American president is enhancing transatlantic dialogue, speaking more about NATO, speaking more about these transatlantic values, that is something that make Russians obsessed. And they need to test NATO in terms of checking how united can be their position in case crisis is happening with the partners, but not exactly with the one of the member states. With the United States as well, we quite well discussed it already at different platforms that the sanctions, the rhetoric of the new administration, and even that interview saying that Putin is killer, we understand that it is not official position of White House, but it is something stated publicly. It's also frustrated Kremlin, and Kremlin needed a certain asymmetric political reply in this way. Sanctions and spies caught in Italy, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, the latest crisis, that's also something that is making extremely bad image of Russia in the pro-Russian European Union member states. So when Russia is losing its European partners, when it is losing the American administration that sometimes was not that coherent in their position, and here I mean White House, not the whole American political system for sure. So that is something that Kremlin couldn't resist but to test and to a little bit to bull, let's be honest. That is the tactic that Russians are liking to use, some kind of bullying against the Western partners, or for them it is adversaries, not the partners. But why I also said the Black Sea, because that is the first time when we see such a strong buildup in the Black Sea. And here the situation is much more serious, because here Russians, when they're building up at the borders of Ukraine, they're doing it legally. That is their territory, they can do it. Somebody can say that it is a little bit violation of the Vienna document, but still not that much. It is the possibility to ignore some of the positions of the Vienna document, but the Black Sea is not a territory of the Russian Federation. So here they need to follow at least the Convention on the Law of the Sea. They need to follow the territorial waters. They need to follow the rules of the Treaty of Azov and many others. And what they are doing now, they are completely ignoring all of these conventions and treaties. They're ignoring the principles of safety of navigation, of the commercial shipment, of territorial waters. They are bringing so many ships that we haven't seen even in 2014. And that is also happening not only against Ukraine, here we understand, but it is also a certain demonstration for Turkey, because we understand perfectly that Turkish Navy being predominantly busy in the Mediterranean and let's say on the south, but not on the north. So even the Turkish Navy is much stronger than Russian, but it is busy in the different domains. So it's a good opportunity to demonstrate that Turks are not dominating in the Black Sea. The second is definitely it is against NATO and against the tailored presence and against the rotation of the ships. And also in some way demonstrating to Romania that they can pretend they would like some kind of leadership and security in the Black Sea, but they have nothing against this. But also it is very important the closing of the Kerch Strait. The issue that have been on the agenda for the last years with the incident in November 2018 was capturing Ukrainian ships, with the difficulties to commercial navigation, with the stopping and blocking of the routes that we already had, like we used to it a little bit. But this time Russians just closed the Kerch Strait from April till October. As you can imagine, none of the military exercises can happen in such a way that really needs such a long closing, and especially that they're closing even for the Ukrainian ships. So it makes a violation of any kind of logic and the bilateral legislation. But what is interesting, one of our participants asked about water shortage for Crimea, and one of the gossips that are now happening around both in Russia and Ukraine, that Russia may propose exchange, allowing fresh water from Ukraine to Crimea in exchange to opening Kerch Strait. And that's becoming quite an interesting, because in this way, Russia is demonstrating that they are ready for such kind of bargain. And this bargain is like choose from two evils. Choose between one bad and another bad, or we will introduce you third bad. And here is definitely a very serious question how the West and how Ukraine and other Black Sea countries will be able to respond. Because one of the biggest things that Russian leadership is afraid, it is unity. And it is the statements which are further than just a deep concern. You know that in Ukraine, the biggest amount of memes in 2014, 2015, it was somebody from the European bureaucrats saying we are deeply concerned. Because definitely like, okay, you're deeply concerned, what is next? We are dying here. But this time we see the level of negotiations, of telephone conversations, of military support, of joint meetings. Last week, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine participated in the NATO high-level meeting. Just today, he participated in the European Union Council. It all demonstrates how seriously and how united our Western partners are taking into consideration this situation. The question is, what is next? And it is always the question, because as for now, the situation looks as in the American movies when two cars are coming to each other, and the question is who will be the first one to turn away. So definitely that is the question: who has stronger nerves, who has more courage, and who is ready not to go under the panic. Because that is definitely what Russia is wishing to have, a panic and disunity and somebody getting out from the chain of Ukrainian support. But the fear is that it also can be a cover-up for some additional actions, because we understand perfectly that with this build-up, Russia is also increasing their actions, malign foreign influence, both in Belarus and Moldova, at least. So it's always a risk that we can concentrate too much on Ukraine and to miss their possible actions in other directions.
Thank you so much. And now Ambassador Kurt Walker, who's been U.S. Special Representative to Ukraine and who knows deeply the situation on the ground, but also who can help us explain what are the options for the West. Kurt, please, the floor is yours.
Well, Shota, thank you much. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with Tadas and Hanna as well. So thank you for inviting me. I think Tadas did an excellent job in outlining the way Ukraine is seen from Moscow and the role it plays in Russian identity, and why Putin in particular has such an aggressive approach toward Ukraine, as it is an essential part of the myth that he's created about what Russia is today. I would say it's also true in reverse, that a successful Ukraine, a democratic Ukraine, a Western Ukraine is seen by Putin as a threat, because that means that there's no reason why the Russian people have to be living under an authoritarian rule with mass poverty and no sharing in national wealth and so forth. So he needs not only to keep Ukraine subordinated to Russia for the national myth, he also needs to prevent Ukraine from becoming successful in order to avoid undermining that national myth at home. I think it's also significant what Tadas said about the national media building Ukraine into being the greatest enemy of the Russian people after the United States. That's a significant change from how Ukraine has traditionally been viewed in Russia. And I'm not sure that it resonates very well in Russia, even though that is clearly what Putin is attempting. I think it is only successful as a message to the degree that the disinformation that Putin puts out is accepted. I think if the Russian people were to truly understand that Russian forces are directly operating on Ukrainian territory and killing Ukrainians, they would not understand why Russia is doing that and not support it. So that's why it's also critically important for Putin to obscure the degree of Russia's direct role in fighting in Ukraine. That brings up a couple things then, because if if Putin is to be deterred from launching a new major military invasion in Ukraine, it's going to have to be a combination of things. One of them is the certainty of exposure of deliberate Russian policy, which makes me think that a change of boundaries, a breakout from Donbass, is unlikely, because I think that would be incontrovertibly Russian forces doing it and undermine his entire narrative over the last 7 years that this is an internal Ukrainian conflict. On the other hand, as Hanna pointed out, there is the Black Sea, the Sea of Azov, territorial waters. And there is also a question of water supplies for Crimea and where are the appropriate boundaries for what Russia considers to be Russian Crimea. And there, I think it would be a linkage to existing narrative that Crimea is and has always been Russian, which would be different from a breakout from the Donbass. So I think those are some of the factors to bear in mind. From a question of Western policy then, Shota, which is what you've asked me to address, I would say, first off, the Biden administration and several other European governments have done a very good job on messaging. They have identified what Russia is doing, called it out, condemned it. Itself, White House, State Department, NATO, European Union, G7. The diplomacy has been active. Secretary Blinken has called many of his counterparts to discuss Ukraine, including the French and German and British foreign ministers, including the Secretary General of NATO, meeting with the European Union to discuss this. Others have done the same thing. We have recently put new sanctions on Russia as a result of cyber attacks in the US. We have encouraged others to do similar things. Just this weekend, the Czechs expelled 18 Russian diplomats for activities that they conducted in the Czech Republic 7 years ago. But I think they will now be going to NATO and the EU to seek more support for that as well. So putting all of that together, there is a very strong rhetorical and measured Western response thus far. The challenge is that Putin is prepared to take action. He's prepared to use military force. He is prepared to call a Western bluff, if you will. So the challenge that I think the Biden administration must now confront, and I say now, I mean literally this week, with Putin's address to the Rada on, to the Duma on, I think his ability to address the Rada would occur only once. His address to the Duma on Wednesday, I think there is a possibility he will want to make some new pronouncements and maybe link them to some direct actions that he would take. So we have a very short window in which we can communicate what concrete actions the US and the West would take if Russia were to launch new aggressive action against Ukraine. This so far has not been done, not in a security sense, not in a sanctions sense, sanctions that could really bite, not in any other way. And so I think that is urgent. One troubling thing that took place last week was the US decision not to send 2 destroyers to the Black Sea. They had been en route, and it was a deliberate decision not to send them in order to avoid an escalation of tensions in the Black Sea with Russia. I think that unfortunately that is read by Putin as weakness and was almost like a starting whistle for him to then increase the Russian deployments to the Black Sea and to close the Kerch Strait and to limit any movements in and out of the Sea of Azov. So I think we're at a particularly dangerous time right now. We need to be thinking about that what if it's more than just saber rattling this time, and what are the things that we are prepared to do. One final thing I would say, just in terms of the messaging, because Taras talked about both sides having concluded that peace is impossible. I would say that a little bit differently. I understand his point, and I think it's a good point. I think he's right that Zelensky concluded that Russia has no interest in peace. But Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, I think, still are positioned to negotiate a peaceful settlement and restoration of the Donbass to Ukrainian territory. I think they're willing to be creative in how to do so. The problem is that they do not have a partner in those peace talks. Russia denies that it is the invader and the aggressor, and then it refuses to engage in meaningful peace talks, complete violation of the Minsk agreements itself, in terms, for instance, of failing to remove foreign forces from Ukrainian territory, while accusing Ukraine of being the one that is violating them. So as long as that's the case, I don't think it is possible. But I do want to highlight that I believe the Ukrainian side, at least, remains committed to working through a peace process to achieve a resolution and an end of the conflict and a restoration of the territory to Ukraine, which is important. And I think it's important for the dynamic of Ukraine's relations with Germany, France, EU, United States, to be seen on the side of willing to take steps for peace, even though it is not possible right now because of Putin's determination.
Thank you, Kurt. And now we are open for the questions. So please ask the questions. But before you do so, let me ask one question to all three speakers. What Kurt called the what if question. What if? You know, this 150,000 is a huge force, and has Putin deployed them just to pull them back at some point? Yeah, we sometimes don't even want to think on the unthinkable, and we all certainly hope that this will not happen. And so I don't believe the full-scale invasion or full-scale occupation of Ukraine can be on the agenda. It's simply too big, as Taras said. But maybe some enlargement of the area of occupation, maybe putting some pressure on Ukrainian government, maybe the testing the new U.S. leadership and the cohesion within NATO. There are a billion things that Putin might be considering. So again, this what if question, how big are the chances that something catastrophic might happen, and then what we do? To all three of you.
Taras, go ahead.
Sure. I think Ambassador Volker's right that, and it's a very important point that is often missed in the West, that the way Russians look at Crimea and the way they look at Donbass is totally different. Crimea is a kind of, you know, it's the Jerusalem, Sevastopol, the mythology of Sevastopol, Crimea, and hence why there's been a stable 85% support for annexation. The Donbass is different, and it's not clear whether Putin would be able to launch a military aggression there and maintain Russian support, because the Donbass doesn't have that kind of same mythology in Russian history, Russian national identity. I mean, it's the last bit of the so-called New Russia project of 2014. The jewels in the crown were Odessa and Kharkiv, what they wanted to get in 2014. They didn't get them. They got the Donbass.
Sorry for interruption, but South Ossetia didn't have any role in the Russian historical narrative either.
I think that's why I think the Georgian case is completely different. I mean, it's personal conflict between Saakashvili and Putin, and also geopolitics. This is not Russian national identity. In the Ukrainian case, it's far more complicated and far more. But I think that Ambassador Volker is also right that until now, Putin has hidden military aggression in eastern Ukraine by continuously pumping out in Russian TV, which is state-controlled, that this is a civil war in Ukraine. That this is, and of course, this is completely ludicrous if you travel to the front line of the Donbass, because there are many Russian speakers. 50–60% of Ukrainian soldiers are Russian speakers from eastern Ukraine. How can it be a civil war between Russian and Ukrainian speakers if Russian speakers are supporting Ukraine? But this is the mythology in Moscow. So if you launch an invasion, you completely destroy that mythology. You no longer are able to argue that, no, we have no troops in Ukraine, this is a civil war. And that has tremendous repercussions, both in terms of diplomacy. How can Russia therefore continue to be a member of the Normandy format and Minsk trilateral group if it's invading Ukraine. I mean, at the moment, it camouflages itself in those two groups, those two negotiating groups, by saying it's a civil war, we're not involved. Of course, nobody believes that in the West, but in Russia they do. And that's why I think that that's important. I think that the only potential scenario at the moment is that Russia as in 2008 in Georgia, Russia responds to a Ukrainian overreaction to military aggression by Russian proxy forces. And then Russia has the excuse to tell its citizens, we are just responding to protect Russian citizens in the Donbass. Because that's what they've done. They've handed out passports. But if Russia were to just simply itself invade, how would it tell its citizens why it's doing that? Because what's happened is that today, 70–80% of Ukrainians no longer see Russians as their brother nation. In Russia, they still believe this Soviet myth. So how does Putin sell to the Russian public that he's killing and fighting brother Ukrainians? At the moment, he's hiding that with the civil war. But if he launches something, so the only option for him is to get the Ukrainians to react to a provocation. He then comes in, invades, as in Georgia in 2008, maybe uses that as the excuse to enlarge, create a kind of buffer zone around the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic by expanding to the whole of Donbass. Currently, those two separatist regions control a third of Donbass. So the whole of Donbass. But I don't think he has other potential options beyond that. I mean, I don't think that the idea of Russia somehow invading southern Ukraine to get water resources is very serious at the moment. So I think the reason why Putin's frustrated is that his options are limited.
So it's a question of good excuse.
Yeah, I would probably join here to.
Sorry.
Yeah, saying that Russia needs excuse, and they always needed excuse for some aggressive action. So in this case, definitely Crimea and Donbass are quite different. And if we go for Donbass provocation or some kind of the incident, that can be the most probable way. At the same time, that is quite an interesting what narratives are currently going from the Russian experts, especially military experts, who are seriously considering the possibilities of some kind of amphibious operation or Navy attack somewhere between Odessa and Mykolaiv. And what is interesting with the completely false assumptions about Ukrainian forces being staged there. And that's really raised question why this is happening, because these people are military experts, so you can't say that they're just ignorant. In all other situations, they were very careful with the data and forces and all other stuff. So it's not somebody commenting elections suddenly speaking about shit. And here you read the interview where they says that Ukrainian coast around Odessa is completely unprotected. Me living in Odessa, I know how many military bases I have just around my summer house, and how the Navy changed and what are the new Navy bases started. Definitely it's not compared with the Crimean forces, but to say that it is unprotected coast, it's just a nonsense, because it's not the empty lands. It is military base, Navy base, Marine base, so all of them are exactly at that territory. So that is the question, why all these messages are inserted into the media. Why these discussions are circulated in Russians. It looks like they're preparing for some possible action, or at least testing the reaction. How Ukraine and Russia will reply to these as well in media, for example, looking to what are the better possibilities for that. Because in Crimea, that is the most interesting, as already for 1 year, we're discussing how big a chances that Russians will go to open the water channel. And most of the military experts are explaining that technically it's not so easy. And the military shows that it is at least 80 kilometers of the flat land that Russians need to cross. And definitely it's not 2014 or 13 when army was not ready for this. 80 kilometers is 80 kilometers. So definitely the question is more in political pressure of all these actions. So I mean, military as the political pressure, and the high level possibilities of provocation, because provocations can happen on the sea and on the land, but on the east of Ukraine or on the borders. I would say also that provocations are possible around Kharkiv piece of the border. The issue is that we already saw several drones crossing illegally, the Russian official drones crossing illegally the borderline. And that made just a diplomatic scandal, but it was a big question why Russians are trying the border security in that part of the country. And here, just replying one of the questions already raised there by Dr. Varatnyuk about Russian peacekeepers, it looks like definitely, and what Taras was talking about, that in Donbass, Russians may use South Ossetian scenario of being pressed or to enter Ukraine because of some provocations happening. So this scenario is definitely still possible within the Russian thought.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah, let me, if I could, turn to a different question in the Q&A, which is what are the options that are available? Because I think that is important for the West to consider right now. The goal here should be to prevent Russian action rather than to react to it after the fact. Putin has created a fait accompli in South Ossetia, in Abkhazia, in Crimea, in Donbass. We don't need another fait accompli. We should try to prevent it. Prevention or deterrence requires a combination of two things: capability and will. And right now, I don't think that the West has demonstrated either the capability or the will to actually stop Putin. Ukraine has the will, but not the capability. So I think what we need to do is think about what capacities can be brought to bear or announced preemptively to cause Putin to think that the costs will be higher than he wants to bear at this time, and just to play for more time instead. I think a quote unquote solution, which means that nothing happens and tensions remain high, is about the best outcome we could possibly get, and one that we should be striving for, as opposed to a new hot conflict, a new hot war. With that in mind, I think the sanctions imposed by the US last week were a signal that we could sanction Russian sovereign debt, but they weren't comprehensive. You can still buy Russian sovereign debt on secondary markets, even if you're a US bank. So closing those loopholes and really making it impossible for Western countries who want to do banking in the United States to also hold Russian sovereign debt would be a major step. And I think that's something that should be announced in advance, that if Russia were to act, this would happen. Another thing is Russia's access to the international financial transfer system, the SWIFT transfer system. This is something that Europeans have long been loath to do. They have so many business activities that still connect them with Russia, and they want the transfer payments to be able to be made. But at a certain point, I think that this is something that we should start talking about as a reaction if Russia were to seriously invade Ukraine. Another is to try to move some personnel and some equipment to exercise in Western Ukraine or ships into the Black Sea. The British are putting 2 destroyers in this week, and I think the US could reverse its decision not to put its 2 destroyers there in order to put more capacity on the table, and to then suggest that we would provide specific support to the Ukrainians in their effort to defend their own country. I don't think we would succeed in getting the West to say that we would fight Russian forces directly, but I think we would get to a point of saying that we would provide support to the Ukrainian forces. Another is security assistance. There is already US security assistance in the pipeline for Ukraine. And I think the Biden administration should be looking very hard at what can be announced and accelerated right now. And I think we should also be looking at what can be done on Capitol Hill to increase the security assistance available. There's already legislation pending, and the administration could put its weight behind that legislation and seek swift passage. So there are a number of things I think that could be signaled, and they could be conditioned so that it's only in response to a further Russian aggression. And without that, we are prepared to take these acts, but not doing them just yet. I think trying to align a series of policies like that, where we can bring more capacity and demonstrate genuine will, is the best chance we have to play this crisis out over a longer period.
But do you think we are going that way? Do you think there is understanding in the West, in the US, and maybe in Europe too, that some painful steps might need to be taken?
Well, I would say that I think these conversations are taking place. So I don't think people are foolish. If you're in London or Washington or Brussels, people are talking about what can we do. Unfortunately, though, I think the answer when that question is asked is, oh, we can't possibly do that. That's too much. No, we can't do that. And so I don't think people have fully internalized the gravity of the situation or the gravity of the absence of Western moves to deter Russia, because I think they overstate the consequences of action and understate the consequences of inaction.
Absolutely. Let me look now in the Q&A, and if any of our panelists want to take any of the questions, you're welcome. But this is one that is interesting to me. What is important about Julie George, about the public opinion? If Russia engages, so Taras has mentioned that good excuse, and that Russia needs a good excuse. It won't launch a major operation without a good excuse. The question is, I guess, stems from that. What is the importance of the public opinion if Russia engages in a foreign policy effort that is unpopular? What would be the consequences for Putin? Putin is now doing something with Navalny, whatever we think of Navalny, that seems outrageous. But Russian public opinion doesn't seem to mind. So Taras, do you think Russian public opinion will mind if Putin is seen as directly attacking the brother of the Ukrainian nation, and to what extent it will?
I think so, yes. I think that the consequences, but if Putin launches an invasion of eastern Ukraine, he opens up a Pandora's box of many potential consequences. Because, as we've mentioned, Crimea and Donbass are looked upon in different ways by the Russian public opinion. And, I think it could lead to a galvanization of opposition activity in Russia, which is already getting very angry at the treatment of Alexei Navalny. Putin would have to change the manner in which he describes what is taking place in Ukraine. You can't continue to say it's a civil war if you're fighting a real war with Ukraine. Remember that that the Ukrainians and Russians have for many years looked upon this conflict in totally diametrically different ways. Russians have been, zombified by state TV, by social media, by anti-Ukrainian propaganda on Russian TV, to believe that, yes, this is a civil war, that we're not there. Russian troops are not there in Ukraine. In Ukrainian eyes, opinion polls show that an average of 70% of Ukrainians believe a Russian-Ukrainian war is taking place. Very few Ukrainians believe it's a civil war. So Ukrainians and Russians already look upon this very differently. Now, if it's no longer a civil war because Russia is invading and fighting a war with Ukraine, Russia can no longer be a member of the Normandy format, can no longer be a member of the Minsk Trilateral Group, and it can no longer lie to its public that its troops are no longer in Ukraine. So the consequences, I think, are major, and I don't think Putin really wants to go down that road because it was of Crimea. Crimea is just very, very different in Russian eyes, and he's going to be you're killing fellow Ukrainians, so-called brother Ukrainians. I think that there was one question about peacekeeping. This is nothing, when Ambassador Volker was working on this, the whole question of United Nations peacekeeping force came up. And there were two problems then, and I don't think these have gone away. Firstly, since 1991, Russia has always denied the UN any right to hold peacekeeping operations in the former USSR. Russia has demanded that the West and the UN recognize the former USSR as its hegemonic territory, as its privileged zone of interest, as President Medvedev called it, and therefore has not allowed UN peacekeeping forces. And in the Donbass, the US, the West, and Ukraine said, yes, we support UN peacekeepers on the Ukrainian-Russian border. Putin said they could only be on the contact line, on the war zone. Well, all that will do is freeze the conflict in Russia's favor, as we saw everywhere else, in Georgia, Azerbaijan, Moldova. So it's not really gone anywhere. But of course, if that was possible, that would be a solution. But if Russia loses control of the border with Ukraine, it can no longer continue to subsidize militarily, economically, financially, its two proxy states. I mean, the other difference between this conflict and the conflicts in Georgia and Azerbaijan is that there is no, this is an artificial conflict in Ukraine. It's not an ethnic conflict. There are Russian speakers fighting on both sides. There are Orthodox believers fighting on both sides. There are Ukrainians fighting on both. There's no different ethnic group in the Donbass. It's not like South Ossetia, Georgia, or Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia versus Azerbaijan. So without Russian support, these two regions would simply implode because it's a completely artificial entity. So I think that's why I think Russia does not want peacekeepers on the border, on the Russian-Ukrainian border, because it will be unable to support militarily. It's at the moment, what Russia is doing is saying that Russian forces on the border with Ukraine are the security guarantee for those two proxy republics. And if Ukraine tries to take them back, we will invade. But I don't think Zelensky is that foolish to fall into this trap.
Okay, there are last two questions that I think we should focus on for a little bit of time. One is from Mr. Balkan Devlen from Canada. What steps should Turkey take to make it harder for the Russians to launch yet another invasion of Ukraine? And then the questions about the role of Lithuania and Poland in solving the problem of Russian aggression against Ukraine. What should government? Okay, let's start with Turkey and then move to Poland and Lithuania, because Turkey is yes, please.
Here,
okay. Please, Hannah, please.
I wanted just to say brief, because we just had the recent events that can be a good characteristic of what is happening now. With Lithuania and Poland, that is easy. That is the biggest Ukrainian allies. And last year, we've just created the Lublin Triangle. And we hope that this format will be quite an effective security and political dialogue between three states. And as we know, these two countries are really supporting Ukraine, both in anti-Russian coalition, in international organizations, and in the aspiration towards NATO and European Union, despite some minor issues that we have in Ukrainian-Polish dialogue. So these countries are important, but we perfectly understand that their weight is not that they can contradict the Russian Federation. It is more of the moral support and political support and certain type of locomotive of our ideas within the European and NATO communities. With Turkey, it's always interesting because Turkey is balancing between two countries. But for the last few years, we see that this balance is more in favor of Ukraine. Because if you see the number of the military and military technical contracts signed, just the last visit of the president, it was quite a big number of such contracts. The development of military airplay, support of National Guard. So, and definitely all support to the Crimean Tatars. And here we understand that two big problems really are, I don't know, it is like head to head. Russian myth about Sevastopol and Turkish support of Crimean Tatars. That is something that they will never accommodate together. For Turks, that is important. And also the millions of Crimean Tatars in Turkey are important for Mr. Erdogan during the elections because they support his political party. But at the same time, we perfectly understand that we are still lacking Turkey in the Black Sea. And that is still a problem. And unfortunately, Turkey is not given a stable position. It is both because of their
sorry. Can you repeat that? I could not hear.
Turkey is not providing us with the position in which we will not have doubts, let's say, about the Black Sea. Meaning it's not 100% reliable in terms of Black Sea security. And considering the time, I will name just three main reasons why I think so. First is Turkish position about Montreal Convention and passage of the straits. The second is what is happening in Turkish Navy. And let's not forget that 11 admirals being just fired, and it is the new level of scandal among the Navy. It is domestic problem, but it means that it is undermining the professional level of Navy leadership. And the third issue is that we don't see enough Turkish ships in the Black Sea, Navy ships. And de facto only one big Navy base near Istanbul and a very small one now being developed near Trabzon. So the Turkish Navy is not in the Black Sea to show the flag, to show the power, and to demonstrate that they control the Black Sea equally to the Russian Federation.
Thank you. Good. Good, yes, please.
Well, just on Turkey, and I do think it's an important question. Turkey has provided drones to the Ukrainian military, and I think can continue to do that. It adds an important additional capability. They could help Turkey with counter-electronic warfare, which I think would disrupt Russian operations. They can facilitate the arrival of NATO warships through the straits, the Bosphorus, which is important for their access as Turkey exercises its rights there under the Montreux Convention. And Turkey could also do a lot to speak up for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, including coastal waters and territorial waters, where the Turkish Navy is the single largest other naval presence in the Black Sea alongside Russia. So Turkey could play a much more visible role in affirming support for Ukraine's territorial waters and sovereignty than it has done to date. There are good indications of this. Turkey obviously does not accept Russia's claimed annexation of Crimea. When Zelensky visited Erdogan in Turkey, Erdogan reaffirmed this. And so I think there's a strong basis for this kind of pushback from Turkey. One of the things that would help Turkey play this role would be coming to a resolution on the S-400 issue with NATO. This has obstructed NATO cooperation with Turkey. It has created some animosity on both sides. If that issue could be put into a box, perhaps literally put into a box, then I think that would open greater NATO-Turkish cooperation, which would also strengthen Turkey's position in the Black Sea as well as the NATO access to the Black Sea.
Okay. Well, no, I have to apologize. We have a curfew in Tbilisi, so the staff needs to get back home before it starts. And if you have your final thoughts, or you want to answer any particular questions for a couple of minutes each, and then we have to end this. Hannah, maybe we should start with you.
Thank you. I will make just a small remark because unfortunately we are not able to answer all questions, but as we are hosting by Georgian organization, it seems to me that we need to say a few words about this partnership. And it seems to me that currently for Ukraine and for Georgia, it's quite important to speak with a single voice about what is happening and about Russian actions. The biggest mistake of Ukraine in 2014 was to present Ukraine as a unique case and to separate a little bit from Georgia, thinking that we are the big case and Georgia is small case that happened at that time, how many, 6 years ago. So that was a mistake because we were not able to demonstrate that it is the pattern in the behavior of the Russian Federation, that it is the strategy about those countries which would like to be with the EU and NATO and don't want to follow the Russian model of development. We had the positive impact a few years ago when we finally realized it and started to work together. And last year, unfortunately, we had again a certain decrease in these. It seems to me that now it is again a time to speak with a joint voice, at least in the international organizations, and also to take Moldova in this board. So, because when you're demonstrating that it is not a single case, it's not just about Ukraine, that it is a much bigger strategy of the Russian Federation, but to say of Kremlin, for many countries who are, especially those which are not in Europe, it is a very big symbol and a very big signal about what is happening and why they need to follow attentively the Russian actions. I would say that Japan already learned the lessons, and we see from many meetings in Japan that are happening now with Ukrainian military. But there are many other regions in the world that can be in the interest of Russian Federation, and it's important to demonstrate how far Kremlin can go.
Yes, I could not agree more when you say that Georgia and Ukraine need to speak with one voice, and Moldova will certainly be a very welcome addition. Taras, your final points?
Just one final point. I mean, I agree that the way this war in Ukraine is seen in Moscow, it's seen as a proxy war with the West. That's how Russia sees the war in Ukraine. And the way it does that, the way it explains it to itself, is by saying Ukraine and the people who came to power in the Euromaidan, so that includes Zelensky and Poroshenko, are Western puppets. That Ukraine is a puppet state of the West. Because Ukraine is a fake state in the eyes of Moscow, Ukraine is just a Western puppet state. Its leaders are not independent. They just implement orders from Washington or Brussels. And because of that, Russia does really believe that this is a proxy war it is fighting against the West. And this is a war that Russia, or Putin, believes he's been fighting since his quite well-known speech in Munich Security Conference in February 2007. The West, unfortunately, only began to understand this after 2014. But this is something that, in Putin's eyes, they have been doing for, what, now 13, 14 years. So I think it's about time the West understood that for Russia, they feel that they've been at war with the West for a very long time. The West has been reluctant to, I think, accept that, but it has no choice, I think, now, particularly when so much more information is coming out about Russian actions around Europe, like the terrorist attack in blowing up an ammunition dump in the Czech Republic, which, by the way, the ammunition was destined for Ukraine. That was the reason why it was blown up. So I think we need to, yes, all of these, Ukraine is not an isolated conflict. It's part of what Russia sees as a war. It's taking place with the West.
Thank you. Kurt, please.
Just a very quick final word. I think that you're very prescient, Shota, in scheduling this conversation today, because I think time is really of the essence in terms of pulling the Western policy together. I think we have a limited amount of time before Putin decides what he's really going to do with all those military forces that he has assembled. Probably has a few weeks before he either has to start sending them back or doing something with them. And I also think that with his speech to the Duma and President Biden's speech to the US joint houses of Congress, there are a lot of things in the coming 1 to 2 weeks that will be potential trigger points. And we should be thinking very hard and very fast about what we can put out there to try to deter the worst kind of Russian action, so rather than wait and see what happens and then try to respond.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we should be on alert and try to act before something happens. And with that, let me thank you all. Thank our audience and wish for peace and wish for whole democratic and free Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.